Welcome to the afternoon session. And here's Eric.
Hi, y'all. I'm Eric. I use he, him pronouns. Thank you, Rob, for turning it over to me. In this section, we're going to look at the different topics that are included in the California History Social Science Framework, which was updated in 2016. That has different LGBTQ history topics that are actually suggested that we can use to teach in K through 12 classrooms. So the Fair Education Act was passed in 2011. In 2016, the framework was updated, as you all know. And we're going to get into some of the specifics of what grade levels, what we can teach at what grade level. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So we have, when we're looking at teaching LGBTQ content and LGBTQ history in grades 2 to 5, it's important to look at family unit discussions. For example, are families that have maybe 2 dads or 2 moms or 1 parent, are they represented in there? And then for 4th and 5th grade, we have the California Gold Rush, and the majority of minors were men, and Native Americans and Two-Spirit traditions, and gender and families are topics that can lend us an opportunity to talk about LGBTQ content in there. If you can go to the next slide, please. So these are some questions that are included in the textbook evaluation kits and the textbook selection guidelines that we can ask when it comes to content during this, when teaching about LGBTQ content in these grade levels. So as I said, does the section about families include narration and photos about LGBT children and families? Are families shown in an inclusive way? And are the images and everything that are included in the textbooks or the materials reflective of the diverse people that we're teaching about? You can go to the next slide, please. And this is for grade 5. Does the section about Native American tribes include a discussion about gender roles and religion? As we know, before the colonization of the Americas, there were many expansive ways of understanding genders and sexualities, and that shouldn't be left out of the discussion when we're talking about Native American tribes on Turtle Island here. And then later on, of course, if we can go to the next slide, actually. Okay, wonderful. So for grade 8, for example, we have the Constitution and the 14th Amendment, Westward Movement and Gender and Diversity in Frontier Life, Native Americans, Gender Roles and Two-Spirit Folks again, and cross-dressing or passing women in the Civil War. And note that cross-dressing is also a term that's used in its historical context of folks who would express themselves outwardly as a different gender than their own. And of course, family life in enslaved communities and kind of the family dynamics and what was accepted, what was not accepted, which are vastly different than modern understandings of genders and sexualities. If you can go to the next slide. So some questions to consider are, in the section about founding documents is 14th Amendment and its importance in history and equality. When it comes to slavery, discussion of family structures, as I mentioned, and gender roles and gender ratio when it comes to the frontier life. And of course, Charlie Parkhurst, whom Rob will talk about shortly as an example, as a perfect example that can be actually explored in 4th and 5th grade, I want to say, and 8th grade levels about different understandings of gender and what, for example, trans identities may mean. So for grade 11, then we have 20th century, kind of late 19th century and 20th century. And this is where there's a lot of content to talk about, because in the 20th century, there's also the birth of kind of the LGBTQ civil rights movement, and it's becoming much more organized and much more prominent. And we can, there's a lot of content to cover. For example, we have romantic friendships that increase women's rights. And we will talk about Jane Addams in a little bit, who is a perfect example of that. Gays in the military from the Civil War to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which is a whole topic of discussion. Harlem Renaissance, we will talk about how queer identities were a big part of Harlem Renaissance and what it brought Harlem Renaissance to its prominence, as well as, you know, racial and ethnic identities. So, and then later on, as we move through the 20th century, we have the Lavender Scare, which was essentially the systemic removal of gays and lesbians from government jobs. And it affected more people than the Red Scare, but again, it's not really included in any of the history content that we learn. And the 1950s and onwards is when a lot of LGBTQ organizations start forming and the LGBTQ civil rights movement really starts taking off. So after that, of course, we have amendments, laws and court decisions that expand equality for LGBTQ folks. And then we kind of reach this pivotal moment of the Stonewall riots, where we had critical mass and like a very large demonstration of the desire and the movement to have LGBTQ rights. And then pride parades follow a year after the Stonewall riots, and of course the AIDS epidemic afterwards. We can go to the next slide, please. I know it's a lot of content that we're going through really fast right now, but this is just to give you an overview of all the opportunities that there are really in our history and social science classes that we can talk about LGBTQ content, even if it doesn't have to do specifically with history. You know, for like different social science topics, for example, the family structures and gender roles. I suppose that does have to do with history, but you get the gist of kind of the topics that are available to us.
Can I comment on this one, Eric?
Yes, please.
So Eric's talked about, you know, what should be in textbooks. Let's just be honest that you're not going to find all this stuff. You're not going to find the stuff that's just in the history social science framework in any textbook at this point in time. So just know that up front. You're never going to find everything taught about LGBTQ history in any textbook. Now, if any of you are publishers out there and you want to write it, go for it. But that's the reality. And just for you all to know historically, having helped with textbook adoptions, you know, even during the regular years, the earlier years, no textbook would cover more than 70 or 80% of the standards the way we would like them. So it's even a smaller percent. So that's why we're showing you these slides so that you can begin to realize, oh, these are topics to learn more about. And hopefully some of you will develop these collections and then that will become kind of our online digital textbook.
Thank you for that, Rob. And yeah, to kind of follow up on that point as well, the reason why a lot of, well, those of us who are creating LGBTQ history curriculum out there, we are kind of going off of the idea that the textbooks are just a tool to use for teaching, but we have a lot of independent curriculum that are aligned with the history and social science framework, designed and written by classroom teachers that actually do go very deep into these topics, and they explore all of these topics. Well, most of them. We're working on getting to all of them. But, you know, for example, on lgbtqhistory.org, there are a variety of lessons that talk about these topics that you can use to teach in the classroom instead of textbooks. Or on onearchives.org, we also have a lot of different lesson plans. We will share all of these links with you if we haven't already, and we will talk about them in much greater detail over the next couple of days. So thank you, Rob, for mentioning all of that. So again, for 11th grade, because it's US history and it's 20th century US history, we have a lot of content to work with. Some of the key people in LGBTQ history that we can highlight are, as listed, Kristen Jorgensen, who is one of the first prominent trans celebrities, if you will, in America. And then we have Frank Kameny, who was a government employee who got fired from his job during the Lavender Scare that I was talking about earlier. Alfred Kinsey and his invaluable research. Bayard Rustin, whom we will talk about in a little bit. Elaine Locke, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Cleve Jones, Harvey Milk, Elaine Noble, Diane Shore, Maya Macy, Beth Glenn, and many, many, many other folks that are not mentioned in here, but they have existed and contributed to LGBTQ, to the history of the United States and to the world, and deserve recognition, need to be learned about. So that was just a quick overview of all the content that that is suggested in the framework as LGBTQ history topics to teach. And I'm going to turn it back over to Rob for a group work activity.
So, so Eric gave you that